welcome to another live stream on History by Podcast. And today, Dr. Robert and Price is joining us, and we're going to be talking about the chronological problems with Paul's letters. In previous episodes that I've done on this topic recently, including the 2 shows I did with Derek, I covered a lot of the internal and some of the external evidence for dating Paul's epistles later, but today we're going to be looking more at the external evidence rather than the internal evidence. And yes, at last, I have a slide to show everybody Epiphanius' Panorion, where he actually says that Corinthus and Paul had an issue of one another at the end of the 1st century. So I'm going to show this time. I'm not just going to be reading. I'm not just going to be briefly mentioning it. I'm going to actually show it. It's a long paragraph. I had to keep the whole thing there because I know some people complained that the slides were a bit big, making the text a little difficult to read. But on this one, I really had to keep the whole thing there. You'll see why, because what Epiphanius is saying, the whole thing just has to be there. It just has to be there. But we'll get to that evidence a little bit, including a reference, a very strange reference by Clement of Alexandria that makes Marcion and Paul contemporaries. I got a slide for that too, with all the text. And there's been some people in the comments, not gonna name who they are, dodging, deflecting, trying to go through the Greek and try to fiddle with it and try to make it look like it's not saying what it's saying, but it's exactly what it says. So it's not gonna work. We'll get to all of that in a moment. But Bob, I want to start with you before I start bringing up these slides. When you look at when you go through Paul's letters yourself, and you really go through this real well in the Amazing Colossal Apostle, and you're basically rampaging one letter after the other, showing one problem after the other. Mm-hmm. But I want to start with Romans because I feel like we don't talk about this part enough. What clues do you see in the letter to the Romans that shows the letter was written after 70 AD?
Well, for one thing, in the section that Marcion's text didn't have, chapters 9 through 11, about Israel, which that's what he calls them rather than Jews as elsewhere in the Romans text, there's this business about how their altar, their table has become a stumbling block. That strikes me as odd. It's a little odd any way you cut it, but it seems to me to make the most sense if he's referring to the altar in the temple, which is now gone, which, Paul, the conventional dating of Paul would mean he couldn't be referring to that, but what the heck is he talking about? It seems to me that's a big clue. Plus the whole tenor of the section, which takes it for granted that Jews in toto, or at least en masse, have rejected Christianity. And so that he says, yeah, there is hope for them, though, to jump aboard the bandwagon. You see, God has blinded them for the duration to give the Gentiles a chance to take a whack at the gospel, and they will, and they are, and that's why I'm the apostle to the Gentiles. But don't worry, don't go thinking that you've simply replaced the Jews, which of course is what many Christians think. No. They're just taking a breather, and it won't be long before the whole number of the predestined elect join up and show up at the recruitment center, and then that'll be it. History will be over. It will have played itself out, and we'll all be one big happy family in Christ. That seems to me impossible as the historical perspective of somebody who's writing around 60 CE. In that length of time, you can be so sure that Jews as a whole have washed their hands of it? I don't think so. And it just seems to me that's one big thing. Now, you can say, well, it's because those chapters weren't original to the text and they're later, but not the whole thing. But it's more complicated than that. like the first couple of chapters in Romans sound not like Christian teaching, but like a Hellenistic Jewish teaching, saying that, hey, fellow Jews, you may think that we're we're in a privileged position. We've got the Torah, unlike those benighted dummy Gentiles. But hey, there are some of them that have the Torah written on their heart, a la Jeremiah and Ezekiel. So they're not really missing anything by not being brought up in the Torah and simply inheriting the Torah, as many of our people have done. That doesn't seem to stop them from being as bad or worse sinners as the unregenerate among the Gentiles. This doesn't sound like, what's the role of a savior then? I mean, that if anything is salvation by works, that would seem to be it. And so what are we talking about here? That the whole thing seems not to be what we usually think of as Pauline, and to post date the historical perspective of any Paul that was writing in the 50s and 60s.
All right, sorry for the brief pause there. There's a question in the chat. Why is Bob using the word Christian when Paul doesn't? So
Well,
I just wanted to respond to that real quick.
Just for convenience sake. I mean, believers in Jesus, whatever you want to call them, but I just want to make clear that we're talking about the Jesus faction, and among Jews or Christians. But then I also refer to them as Jews and Gentiles, and that's really all I mean.
All right, so we're going to take a look at a couple of references. So first off, I want to start with the Acts of Timothy. So this time I had the text on the screen. This was translated by Calvin W. Concanon. There should be two N's here. I don't know why there's only one, but and that reminds me, I want to, because of that typo, I just want to make sure I want to double check the attribution real quick, but I'm pretty sure it's good.
I think you do have the two ends together.
Yeah, no, I just added it. That's why.
Oh, slip one past me.
Yes, I did not screw up again. So anyway, yeah, this was translated by Calvin W. Concanon, just to get the citation out of the way. This is the Acts of Timothy translation that I'm using. Now we're going to go actually into the slide and read from it. So this is a very strange text, strange for the standard dating, because what this text is indicating is that Timothy was in Ephesus during Domitian's reign, and pretty much at the end of it, he's killed. And then you got John, who is living past Domitian's reign. And you have this mention over here where it talks about Nerva releasing people that were persecuted. I think other texts talk about this as well. But when you look into the pastoral letters, which is held by many scholars, but not all scholars, to be not by Paul, I would say it fits better in Nerva's reign. So I would say that's really at the end of Domitian's reign, so it's like 96 AD. So that makes sense to me. But what is interesting about this is that it's placing Timothy's death extremely late. Now, you could believe it's possible to dodge this and say, well, this doesn't contradict the standard dating, so I'm going to try to be fair here. Okay, so Timothy died in 96 AD, but that doesn't mean that the standard dating is wrong. It could just mean that Timothy lived longer than we thought. Perhaps. But that's not the only reference that we have to contend with here. We're just getting started. So the Acts of Timothy, now this is disputed, although I don't really see the problem with it, honestly, that Polycrates of Ephesus wrote it. I think he did. I don't really have a problem with it being a mid-late 2nd century document. But it is very strange that it's placing Timothy's death so late in the game. Now, this could just be nothing, right? If this was the only reference to work with, then it wouldn't be enough, I suppose. But this is where things get a bit more strange. It'll be appropriate to start with Irenaeus first before I bring up Epiphanius. And so when we look at what Irenaeus is saying here, that Corinthus and John are having a confrontation at a bathhouse. So there's an incident at the bathhouse, and this is happening again at the end or just after Domitian's reign. And the reason I'm showing this is to say, okay, so the Acts of Timothy places John at Ephesus in the 90s AD. Anyone who studies the church fathers and really looks for references to John will know that there's a story that's constantly repeated that John was in Ephesus in the 90s. Mm-hmm. Now, the implication is if Corinthus and John are having a confrontation in the 90s, and Timothy also dies in the 90s, well, what if Paul could be connected to Corinthus then? Hmm. Now, I kind of brought in the implication before bringing in the rest of the facts. Well, I kind of inverted that when I shouldn't have. But let me go ahead and fix this by heading straight to Epiphanius. Now, I've never read this whole thing on screen before. At least I don't remember doing so. I will this time. Now, this man is one of the ones who caused the trouble in the apostles' time. When James wrote the letter to Antioch and said, "We know that certain which went out from us have come unto you and troubled you with words, to whom we gave no such commandment," he is also one of those who opposed St. Peter because he had gone to St. Cornelius when Cornelius had been vouchsafed a vision of an angel and had sent for Peter. And Peter was dubious and saw the vision of the sheet and the things that were in it. And was told by the Lord to call nothing common or unclean. And so Corinthus stirred the circumcised multitudes up over Peter on his return to Jerusalem, saying he went into men uncircumcised. Corinthus did this before preaching his doctrine in Asia and falling into the deeper pit of his destruction. For because he was circumcised himself, he sought an excuse through circumcision, if you please, for his opposition to the uncircumcised believers. But because the Lord unfailingly cares for mankind, safeguards the clarity of the truth in the sons of the truth, and has granted the holy apostle Peter to give the refutation of Corinthus and his party. The stupidity of Corinthus becomes evident. St. Peter said, "I was in the city of Joppa, and give the refutation of Corinthus and his party." Oh, sorry, I went backwards. "And at midday, about the 6th hour, I saw a sheet let down, knit at the four corners, wherein were all manner of four-footed beasts and creeping things. And he said unto me, Slay and eat. And I said, Not so, Lord, for nothing common or unclean hath at any time entered into my mouth. But the voice answered me again from heaven, What God hath cleansed, that call not though common. And behold, immediately there were 2 men already come onto the house, and the Spirit said unto me, Go with them, nothing doubting. And then he explained how this had been said to him as a parable, and how he had been doubtful at the time, till the Lord showed him plainly the things he was teaching him through the words and images. For the instant he opened his mouth, when he had come to Caesarea, the Holy Spirit fell upon Cornelius, and seeing this, Peter said, Can any man forbid water to these, which have been counted worthy to receive the Holy Ghost? As we were at the beginning, but all this was a mystery and an act of God's loving kindness. So that St. Peter and everyone else would realize that the salvation of the Gentiles is not of man, but of God. God had granted the gift of the Holy Spirit, the vision of the angel, and the acceptance of Cornelius's prayer. Fasting and alms beforehand so that the apostle St. Peter, especially and the other apostles, would deprive no one truly called by God of that with which they had been entrusted. But these doings took place then at the instigation of that false apostle Corinthus. Another time, too, he and his friends caused a discord at Jerusalem itself. Now, here's the big one that everybody's been waiting for. When Paul arrived with Titus in Corinthus. So now Paul's in here. There's a confrontation going on here. Okay, so I'm going to finish reading this. He hath brought in men uncircumcised with him, speaking now of Titus, and polluted the holy place. And so Paul says, but neither Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised, but because of the false brethren, unawares brought in, who came in privily to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ. This is all stuff talked about in Galatians. Mm-hmm. To whom we gave place by subjection, not even temporarily. Mm-hmm. And he used to command the uncircumcised, but be not circumcised, for if ye be circumcised, Christ shall profit. Well, excuse this space error there. Do nothing. Circumcision was a temporary expedient until the greater circumcision arrived. That is the laver of regeneration. As is plain to everyone and is shown more clearly by the things the apostles said, especially the holy apostle Paul, for he insists to them we gave place by subjection, not even temporarily. Let me take this off the screen so we can reflect on what we just read here. So, Bob, is it just me, or does that sound like Paul and Corinthus are being placed in the same era?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that he's the one that instigated the trouble that is discussed in Galatians. It would have to mean he's a contemporary of Paul, Barnabas, and Peter.
Yeah.
And here's an oddity that I never thought of until now. I know this is a just guesswork, but Luke is the one, and the Acts author is the one that tells us that the sheet of sailcloth, I think specifically, was lowered with all the clean and unclean animals, and a voice whose owner you don't see said, "Get up, Peter, time for dinner." And he says, what? No way, never. Is it possible, like, Acts also is the only reference to Paul's secular profession as being a tent maker with sailcloth and so on, pretty much the same thing. Is it conceivable there's a sort of wink to the reader that he had a dream about Paul telling him that, hey, you don't have to worry about kosher laws. Eat what the Gentiles eat. Let's mix in with them. I know it's probably absurd, but just suddenly occurred to me.
And now I want to bring up this passage from Jerome again. I brought this up many times over the years. I'm going to bring it up again. Paul formerly called Saul an apostle outside the number of the 12 apostles, was of the tribe of Benjamin, of the town of Goodacre in Judea. When this was taken by the Romans, he removed with his parents to Tarsus in Cilicia. Sent by them to Jerusalem to study law, he was educated by Gamaliel, a most learned man whom Luke mentions. Now, let's take a look at what he says in the commentary on Philemon, right in the bottom there. We have received the following story about this Epaphras, Paul's fellow prisoner. They say that the apostle Paul's parents were from the region of Goodacre in Judea, and that when the whole province was laid waste by the hands of the Romans, and the Jews were dispersed into the world, they were moved to the city of Tarsus in Cilicia. As a young man, he followed the condition of his parents, and thus, when he testifies about himself, can be confirmed. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's seed? So am I. And again, elsewhere he says, Hebrew of Hebrews, and the other things that indicate that he was a Jew more than a man of Tarsus. But if this is so, we can conjecture that Epaphras was too arrested at the time when Paul was taken, and that having been found with his own parents in Colossae, a city of Asia, he later received the word about Christ. This is why it is written to the Colossians, as we have said above. Epaphras, who is one of you, a slave of Christ, greets you, being always earnest over you in his prayers. Now, these are odd references. The church fathers, when they bring this stuff up, they don't try to harmonize it with the standard chronology. Now, you can tell by the way Jerome wrote that he's kind of reacting that this is strange. Like, well, we received the tradition, but he doesn't seem to know what to make of it. So he's receiving this from Epaphras. And so the issue is, when you take all these references together, which is what I'm doing for my forthcoming paper for your journal, I'm going to include all of this in the paper. It has to be in there. How do we explain the church fathers saying on one hand that Paul died in the AD 60s, but on the other hand, he died after 70 AD? Is even alive in the 90s AD. So how do we explain this contradiction away? Because some will try to dodge this and say, well, the church fathers say Paul died under Nero. End of story. Now, I'm going to look at, I don't have this in the slide, but I'm going to read this from the Acts of Timothy, because it's a little earlier than the passage I mentioned, because I'm sure someone's going to run across it and claim that I'm trying to leave stuff out that contradicts what I said. So I'm going to read from it, and we'll talk about it. Here's what it says. This is in page 402 of this book. For that thrice blessed man, as we know him from the historical work of the Catholic Acts, put in order by the most holy evangelist, Luke was born from a Greek father and a Judean mother, who believed but was originally from the city of the Lystrians, which is the capital of the province of the Laconians. He was instructed by Paul, divine among the apostles, and many things were witnessed by him. He was a fellow traveler with Paul and a fellow sufferer for the gospel of Christ, and rendered himself useful to him. He settled in this radiant metropolis of the Ephesians at the same time as Paul, and was the first to sit as bishop on the apostolic throne of this radiant metropolis. At the time when Nero was ruling the state of the Romans and Maximus was proconsul of Asia. All he had accomplished in teachings, wonders, healings, and civic conduct that exceeded human understanding, it is possible for anyone to learn from the things said in various ways concerning him in the Acts of the Holy Apostles. It is right for us to show that this same Timothy, the most holy apostle and patriarch, was not only an eyewitness and direct hearer of the famous apostle Paul, but also of the illustrious theologian John, who rested upon the breast of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ. For when Nero was raging for the martyrdom of the chief apostles, Peter and Paul, and with their illustrious fellow disciples in different ways, John the great theologian happened to arrive in this radiant metropolis after being cast ashore from a shipwreck, as it is possible to learn for those who wish from the things written about him by Irenaeus, bishop of Lugdunum. Now, I may have made an error in maybe one or two episodes when I said, I think I said by mistake, that this text predated Irenaeus. It doesn't. It just talked about him. But that doesn't change the fact that it has a story about Timothy dying in the 90s. Now, again, notice that it knows about the idea that Paul died under Nero. It leaves something out, though. His resurrection under Nero. What happened to that?
Yep.
The Acts of Paul. Has Paul rising from the dead. This is where we get the whole martyrdom story from. Okay. Now, granted, this isn't the introduction part of the text, and yet it's linked to Polycrates of Ephesus, but Polycrates of Ephesus was a contemporary with Irenaeus. So there you have it. They're writing around the same time, 180, 190 AD. Okay. Now, what I'm trying to point out is, why did the Acts of Paul claim that Paul rose from the dead? To me, when you look at all the issues that we've observed in this episode and many previous episodes, it almost smells like, to me, this is an attempt to harmonize a chronological problem. It's not just to make Paul resemble Jesus. That's definitely part of it. But if you have Paul rising from the dead, then he can live and write the text later. It's almost as if it's an early attempt to dodge the chronological problem.
Yeah.
Now,
I know it sounds far out, but if this isn't, these people are living in a different conceptual world. And it is almost an irresistible inference, because they don't do anything else with it after he rises from the dead and ascends into heaven. It's almost like they're just opening the door for him to show up again, because so readers will say, oh, that's why. I mean, who knows? But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense otherwise, and it's really intriguing. It's a viable hypothesis.
Now, what I want to do is, I'm going to see if I can find it real quick. I want to find the Acts of Paul where it talks about Paul rising from the dead, in case somebody tries to dodge that as well. Let's see. Okay. I think I got it. Let's see. Just give me a second. For some reason, it did not occur to me to put this in this particular slideshow. I should have done it. The good news is I just found it from a different slideshow that I used. Let me pull that up real quick. Again, this is written in the late 2nd century. In the documentary episode that I do, that I will be making soon, I'm gonna have the chronology of the text in the proper order. So excuse it looking a little bit discombobulated right now, but we'll fix that later. Let's look at the Acts of Paul. And among many others, Paul also was brought, bound, unto whom all his fellow prisoners gave head, so that Caesar perceived that he was over the camp, and he said to him, Though thou art the great king's man, but my prisoner, how thoughtest thou well to come by stealth into the government of the Romans, and levy soldiers out of my province? But Paul, filled with the Holy Ghost, said before them all, Caesar, not only out of thy province do we levy soldiers, but out of the whole world. For so hath it been ordained and unto us, that no man should be refused who wisheth to serve my king, and if it like thee also to serve him. It is not wealth nor the splendor that is now in this life that shall save thee, but if thou submit and entreat him, thou shalt be saved. For one day he shall fight against the world with fire. And when Caesar heard that, he commanded all the prisoners to be burned with fire, but Paul to be beheaded after the law of the Romans. Now let's look at what the next text says. But Paul kept not silence concerning the word, but communicated with Longus the prefect, and Cestus the centurion. I want everybody to keep that in mind. It says Cestus the centurion, because I'm going to go to Josephus to show where this whole the Neronian martyrdom of Paul BS comes from. Nero therefore went on, was perhaps ad raging in Rome, slaying many Christians without a hearing by the working of the evil one, so that the Romans stood before the palace and cried, It sufficeth, Caesar, for the men are our own, thou destroyest the strength of the Romans. But at that he was persuaded and seized, and commanded that no man should touch any Christian until he should learn freely concerning them. Then was Paul brought unto him after the decree, and he abode by his word, that he should be beheaded. And Paul said, Caesar, it is not for a little space that I live unto my king, and if thou behead me, this will I do. I will arise and show myself unto thee, that I am not dead, but live unto my Lord Jesus Christ, who cometh to judge the world. The longest Augustus said unto Paul, Whence have ye this king, that ye believe in him, and will not change your mind, even unto death? And Paul communicated unto them the word, and said, Ye men that are in this ignorance and error, change your mind, and be saved from the fire that cometh upon all the world. For we serve not, as ye suppose, a king that cometh from the earth, but from heaven, even the living God, who because of the iniquities that are done in this world, cometh as a judge, and blessed is that man, who shall believe in him, and shall live forever, when he cometh to burn the world and purge it freely. Then they, beseeching him, said, We entreat thee, help us, and we will let thee go. But he answered and said, I am not a deserter of Christ, but a lawful soldier of the living God. If I had known that I should die, O Longus and Cestus, I would have done it. But seeing that I live unto God and love myself, I go unto the Lord to come with him in the glory of his Father. They say unto him, How then shall we live when thou art beheaded? And while they yet spake thus, Nero sent one Parthenius and Ferus to see if Paul were already beheaded. And they found him yet alive. All right, everybody, his head got reattached. That's what I was trying to say. It's literally saying his head got reattached. Okay? Let me finish reading this nonsense. And he called them to him and said, Believe on the living God, which raiseth me and all of them that believe on him from the dead. And they said, We go now unto Nero, but when Vodius arises again, then we will believe on thy God. As Longus and Cestus entreated him, yet more concerning salvation, he saith to them, Come quickly unto my grave. In the morning ye shall find two men praying, Titus and Luke. They shall give you the seal of the Lord. This is where the Acts of Timothy is where everybody's getting this whole ridiculous story of Paul's death under Nero. It's from this text. Nobody before the Acts of Paul, to our knowledge, talks about this. And it wants us to think his head got reattached. That should make anyone doubt the whole thing right away. Yeah. This is the best evidence you've got?
Yeah, that's amazing to me how people just make this a bedrock. We know when he died.
No, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But let's explain where he got that story from, because that's the best part. This is from Josephus. And after this calamity had befallen Cestius, did we not see a Cestus in the martyrdom of Paul right there? Just a moment ago? To my knowledge, I've not heard anyone ever suggest before me. I could be wrong, so I'm saying to my knowledge. I've not heard anyone before me, to my present knowledge, that has ever said the Acts of Paul was plagiarizing Josephus to create the martyrdom. But that's what I think is going on here. Look at the similarity in the names. Let's keep reading. Many of those most eminent of the Jews swam away from the city as from a ship when it was going to sink. Costobarus, therefore, and Saul, who were brethren together with Philip, the son of Josephus, who was the commander of King Agrippa's forces, ran away from the city and went to Cestius. But then how Antipas, who had been besieged with them in the king's palace, but would not fly away with them, was afterwards slain by the seditious, we shall relate hereafter. However, Cestius and Saul and his friends, at their own desire, to Achaia to Nero to inform him. However, Cestius sent Saul and his friends at their own desire to Achaia to Nero to inform him of the great distress they were in, and to lay the blame of their kindling the war upon Florus, as hoping to alleviate his own danger by provoking his indignation against Florus. In the meantime, the people of Damascus, when they were informed of the destruction of the Romans, set about the slaughter of those Jews that were among them. And as they had them already coped up together in the place of public exercises, which they had done out of the suspicion they had of them, they thought they should meet with no difficulty in the attempt, yet did they distrust their own wives, which were almost all of them addicted to the Jewish religion on which account it was that their greatest concern was how they might conceal these things from them. So they came upon the Jews and cut their throats as being in a narrow place in number 10,000, and all of them unarmed, and this in 1 hour's time without anybody to disturb them. Now here's the thing. This is the problem. This man is not Paul. Scholars do not believe this man is Paul. I don't think he's Paul either. Now, Robert Eisenman thinks he is. I'll throw that in there. I don't think he is. Josephus has no knowledge that this man's a Christian either. Does Josephus ever mention Paul's letters? Never does. He talks about Jesus, James as supposedly his brother, and John the Baptist. Never talks about Paul. Anywhere. Anywhere. No church. He doesn't know anything about churches being everywhere in the Mediterranean and near the Mediterranean. He doesn't know anything about any of this at all. And to me, that's even worse than Justin Martyr not knowing a thing about Paul. Now, that's pretty bad. But Josephus? Are you kidding me? If we're to believe that if Acts is all history and Paul had all these dealings with major political figures and governors and this and that, how could Josephus not know any of this? Come on. Elsewhere, Josephus calls this particular Saul a wicked man. And so this is to my knowledge, I think this is the only first century Saul that Josephus mentioned. He doesn't mention another Saul from the first century, although he might have. I think there might have been another Saul he mentioned in the BCE era besides the king, but I don't remember. We'll worry about that another time. It doesn't matter. The point is, this is where Acts gets the story of Paul's flight from Damascus in the AD 60s.
Whoa.
Which, by the way, that's 30 years after the King Aretas incident in 2 Corinthians. That's a contradiction.
Yep.
You're going to tell me this is the same guy that fled from Aretas?
Yeah, that's a whopper.
What about Saul after 70, who's a young man that Jerome just talked about? Are we going to believe that's the same human being that fled from King Aretas? I don't think so. That doesn't make sense. Now, let's look at one more thing. This is the kicker right here. And there is just no dancing around it. It just won't work. I think this all comes down to this guy, Clement. I'm going to be reading J.B. Lightfoot's translation. Now let's do a little search here. We're going to go to chapter 5. Oh, actually, here we are. I can't wait to read this. Now, hold on. There we go. So, there have been attempts to trace parallels to the so-called genuine epistles to 1 Clement. Well, here's the problem. I think almost all of us here know that in Romans 15, Paul says he was going to go to Hispania. He never says that he made it there. So I want people to riddle me this. Where did Clement get this information from? By reason of jealousy and strife, Paul, by his example, pointed out the prize of patient endurance. After they had been 7 times in bonds, I await the verse from canonical Paul where he says he was in bonds 7 times in Acts. You'll never find it. Had been driven into exile, had been stoned, had preached in the east and in the west. He won the noble renown, which was the reward of his faith. Having taught righteousness unto the whole world, and having reached, here, look at this, the furthest bounds of the west. Okay, so Paul made it to Spain. Where in the New Testament did Paul make it to Spain, people? Where? So that the problem is, even when the point that I'm establishing here is even when it parallels with canonical text, it also contradicts it.
Mm-hmm.
While we're at it, I don't recall Clement ever mentioning Paul's shipwreck, which was a big deal that everybody, a lot of people were screaming about. Oh, this poor guy getting shipwrecked everywhere. So much bad luck for poor Paul. Oh, but Clement says, I don't care. No, Clement doesn't. It's not that he doesn't care. He didn't know about it.
Yeah.
And what's this whole deal about him getting attacked by jealous believers? Oscar Cullmann in the early 20th century believed that other believers killed Paul and not Romans. Well, that kind of sounds like what Clement's suggesting here, or whoever is writing First Clement. I accept the consensus dating of First Clement that was written around 96 AD. I don't personally have a problem with it, especially given how ignorant Clement is of canonical Paul. I mean, my goodness. There's only the only time that he mentions a letter. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Here we go. 1 Clement 47:1. Take up the epistle of the blessed Paul the Apostle. You see that? A single letter, guys. One letter. One. Just one. And you can see by he cites, we can figure out which letter that is very quickly by typing Cephas. Because you see, it's right there. I did that on purpose to accentuate the point. Of a truth that he charged you in the spirit concerning himself in Cephas and Apollos, because that even then ye had made parties. All right, so what I look at here is that this I think Clement's talking about a pre-war Paul. I'm convinced he's talking about a pre-70 Paul that wrote something. He wrote something to the Corinthians because Clement's quoting from it, or he wrote a letter, whatever that letter is, and he knows some material from it. That's my point. But he doesn't seem to know the letters as we have them, not even close. And Clement doesn't seem to know that he established churches everywhere either. It's that lack of information that makes me think Clement's writing before canonical Paul. Shortly before it. I mean, barely. But he doesn't think any of that was written by the original one. He's not suggesting that they were written by the original one. For those who've seen the previous episodes I've done on this, I think Paul died in 39 AD. I gave my reasoning for it there. But I don't want to go through all the arguments that I made for that in the previous episodes. Now, some people are trying to dodge this by trying to bring up the word generation.
Oh no. Just like in Martin.
You're going to love this, Bob. It is one of the most ridiculous, absurd defenses of an 80-50s Paul I've heard in my entire life so far, if that's saying something. All right, so now we're back to chapter 5. But to pass from the examples of ancient days, let us come to those champions who lived nearest to our time. And I checked the Greek. This is fine. But there might be an idiot or two out there lying about it. So let us set before us the noble examples which belong to our generation. Okay, so here's the thing. It almost sounds like a contradiction. Are these champions nearest to our time, Clement? Or do they belong to our generation? Well, I think the solution is simple. He's trying to say these are examples for our generation. Even though it doesn't quite sound like he's saying that. But it appears to be what he meant. And then after that, this is where he tells us about Paul's death and him making it furthest west of the empire. We already know how that story goes. So I'm not going to reread all of that. So no, this Paul was dead like many decades in the past. Many decades in the past. And it still contradicts the Acts of Paul. I don't care if Clement happened to be a contemporary of the original Paul, which doesn't make sense to me. But even if we granted that, which I will not, neither of us will, the fact is that Clement contradicts the Acts of Paul.
Mm-hmm.
He does not say that the Romans killed Paul, right?
Hmm.
He doesn't know that story.
Unless possibly referring to the Acts of Paul again, that fits the pattern of the 5 major apocryphal Acts of the Apostles, which have Paul and Thomas and the others preaching enchritism, the celibacy gospel, and that's what riles up the alienated husbands of his female converts, and the husbands, fiancés, etc., all have connections. They're all noble women, and so their husbands have a lot of clout. And one of them at least will go to the governor, the king, whoever it is, and says, "Look, there's this charlatan gigolo who's stealing our wives and is doing God knows what with them. You got to put a stop to this, Your Majesty. You can't have this homewrecker running around." I said, yeah, I see what you mean. Hey, Rufus, go out and arrest this guy. And they do. And that's what leads to his martyrdom again and again and again. And I've thought that, I don't know how old that tradition is. I mean, it's got to be older than the Acts themselves.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but are you suggesting this is a different explanation? Because that doesn't sound like that's an explanation for why he was killed by the Romans. But are you talking about a different take on the envy that Clement's talking?
Yeah, that's right. And that they would have gone to Roman officials and said, "Can't you do something about this guy?" Yes, we can.
Well,
and that's why they were martyred.
I think you would agree still that still doesn't quite line up with the Acts of Paul. Because the Acts of Paul is trying to lay
Paul, that's just what happens.
Right.
After Thecla and the whole business.
Well, what I mean is that Nero, it seemed like Nero just wanted Paul dead. He seemed to have somewhat of a stake in killing Paul.
But that's why Thecla's
well, it's part of it, yes.
Also, tell me if this is getting off the subject. I don't think it is, though. You've mentioned the business in Acts, the canonical Acts, where it calls him Saul until he meets Sergius Paulus, and then assumes that name. Well, and you say, well, yeah, because originally it was a Saul, and he took on the name Paul.
Yeah, because he's hijacking the original Paul's authority.
Yep. Yes. And why would anybody do that? Well, we know people did that kind of thing because in the Synoptic Apocalypse, it's a prediction after the fact, but it says to Christian readers, don't be deceived, because in the last times that you readers are in, many will come in my name saying, "I am he." Well, they're fakes. And we happen to know from other Roman writers, even people showed up claiming to be Nero alive again.
Well, exactly.
This isn't far-fetched in the least. And once you factor in the idea of pseudepigraphy, if you think there are epistles written under the name of Paul that the original Paul didn't write, right there, they're claiming to be Paul. Not quite the same way, but
I think the argument that one Clement's older than these other texts is stronger, because Clement doesn't say that the envious reported Paul to the authorities and had the authorities kill him. Clement doesn't specify this. Clement is extremely ignorant of canonical Paul, doesn't know the Gospels either. So there's too much ignorance levied on First Clement to claim that Clement was somehow referring to the Neronian martyrdom in some vague way. That doesn't make sense to me. He's too ignorant of the details. And why would he leave out that Paul rose from the dead? So he never mentions Paul's resurrection. Now, granted, the Acts of Timothy doesn't bring that up either, because it is pretty absurd. It's that's had to make somebody else laugh in the ancient world. But Clement is just too vastly ignorant. Even if Clement didn't write Clement, I still think it has to be before all these other texts. He's just too ignorant to me. He's just too ignorant. And And in the Clementine recognitions, he also replaces Paul in the AD 30s under Caiaphas, or he calls him Saul in that text, but under Caiaphas and Gamaliel. And the only time those two were in simultaneous power was from 30 to 36 AD in their respective positions, of course. That is consistent with 1 Clement.
You know, one reason I suspect mainstream scholars, or really any, have not looked in this direction is this probably unconscious biblicist bias that if it's not actually in the New Testament, they don't really care what any church fathers say. They just say, well, that's a lot of fanciful nonsense. Well, it might be, and sometimes it sounds that way, but if it suits their purposes, like gospel dates and authorships, they're quick to seize on that as reliable information. Why is this not equally to be taken seriously as evidence? All these clashing dates and then the implied explanation, which you alone have noticed.
And this would also explain why Acts never talks about Paul's death. If you're talking about a hijacker of Paul's identity, of course you can't talk about his death. There's 3 different deaths. Did he die in 39 AD, die again in 66 AD, and die again in 97 AD? That's ridiculous.
He does say, I die daily, but that's a little too often to be taken literally, even in this context.
Or is it? Seriously, he, given the kind of things he says, including claiming that God, he had a vision of God inside his mother's womb. When you read Galatians, it's ridiculous. This guy says bonkers nonsense, crap, that if it wasn't the almighty, infallible Paul the Apostle, the person would be called a nut.
Well, like the fetus John the Baptist doing a somersault in the womb when his Jesus detector goes off. If they can say that about him, they can say about Paul. Oh, boy.
Well, and I just asked this question. I'd like to ask this question. How many church fathers bringing up weird stuff like this does it take before we start saying the external evidence is indicating that Paul's writing, or at least the letter writer claiming to be Paul, is writing far later into the 1st century?
Because you've got to ask yourself, even if you don't take it seriously as historical data, well, there has to be some sitz im Leben for these, to us, outlandish sounding stories and these chronological contradictions.
Right.
How did it come about that anybody was saying this? I mean, that's a little harder to penetrate, but it seems to me you have to start asking yourself, where did these differences stem from?
And this is everything that's interesting, because I looked at when you look at the Greek of 2 Thessalonians, when it talks about beware of a letter as if it were from us. Because again, most of Paul's letters are co-authored. Now, here's something that's interesting. A couple of days ago, I did a show with Marcus Vincent, James Valiant. We talked about the co-authors, and Marcus made an interesting alternative argument. But at the same time, I think it's not the best one when it comes to trying. Like, okay, here's what I'm trying to get at. Marcus was suggesting that the co-authors were added deliberately to dilute Paul's letters, to divide authority. Okay, so he agrees that the co-authorship in the epistles divides authority, but he has it going in the opposite direction. Whereas I would say the co-authors are removed from Marcion's Paul. They were removed by Marcion in his edition to give Paul extra authority.
Yeah, it would work either way. One's as plausible as the other.
I think it works. I think it works for canonical priority better, personally, because if we're to believe that the co-authors were added, then why do they not add them in Galatians, Ephesians, 1 Timothy, Titus? Why only add to many of them, to most of them, but not to all of them? But in the Marcionite edition, they're gone from all of them. So there's more consistency in the opposite direction of removing them as co-authors.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
than
Speaking
in
of great
adding.
apostles, here we go. There's
Hey, Jim.
James the Just Valiant.
Hi. I
Hey,
was
good to see you.
enjoying the conversation so much. I was kibitzing in the comments with everyone, and Jacob just randomly sent me. I thought I was going to have the night off, but Jacob randomly linked. You mentioned something earlier at the very start of the conversation that I want you to get back to, Jacob. The testimony that Marcion knew Paul.
Oh, wow. I've totally forgot about that.
I think that would really contribute to the conversation. Now,
all right, everybody.
Comment about our conversation with Professor Vincent the other day. I honestly think it doesn't make much. I mean, his thought is they're diluting. Marcion put great store in Paul's word. Only Paul. He is the apostle for Marcion and all that. But it seems to me if you're using Paul as an authority at all, diluting that authority would not be intelligent. And if you were to do that, why don't you do it to Galatians too? In other words, if you're going to dilute the authority of Thessalonians with Corinthians and Romans, I have a scribe here, a co-author here. Why nothing like that in Galatians? See, if you're going to include co-authors on purpose to dilute, and Professor Vincent is a brilliant linguist and a great teacher.
Absolutely.
I admire his view, but it seems to me if you're banking on the authority of Paul, you're not going to dilute that authority. That dilution had to have occurred, I think, more likely at the earlier stage.
We'll come back to that. Let's come back to that.
Be consistent with it. You do it to Galatians and the pastorals as well, right?
Clement of Alexandria Stramata, Book 7, Chapter 17. Okay, this is it. This is the big one that there's just no dancing around this. It's so bad for the standard dating. It's so bad and merciless. Likewise, they allege that Valentinus was a hearer of Theudas, and he was the pupil of Paul. For Marcion, this is the big phrase, right? This is the big part right here. Who arose in the same age with them. Let me read that again. Who arose in the same age with them, lived as an old man with the younger heretics. And after him, Simon heard for a little the preaching of Peter. Such being the case, it is evident from the high of antiquity and perfect truth of the church that these later heresies and foes yet subsequent to them in time were now inventions falsified from the truth. Okay, Clement, you just made Marcion and Paul contemporaries.
Well,
if the mythical 80-50s dating were correct, how do we? What is he in a time machine? Are we going back to the future with McFly?
He sure.
We're going in that time traveling car.
Marcion.
Doesn't he mention the flux capacitor in Philemon somewhere? No, I guess not.
No, he doesn't. No, like I can't make this up. Clement really is saying this.
Clement seems to be saying that Valentinus and Marcion were old enough to be around when Paul was around. Now that's really hard to square with the mid-2nd century activity.
This is probably, in a lot of ways, this is probably the worst of the references that I've shown tonight. I mean, the bet probably the best for my position, but the worst for the standard view.
I don't know how to account for it, Jacob, except to think.
I do. I think I know what to do with this. Just say that Marcion knew Saul of Giscala, that Jerome's talking about, in the 90s AD.
Who's active.
When Marcion would have been a young person at the time.
Right.
Very young.
Right. You'd still have to be young for your Paul in the 90s. Gosh. You have
this reference is absolutely a blow to the standard dating.
Mm-hmm.
It just is. And I think that moving Paul, the letter writer, later in the 1st century, would make more sense to me than trying to say that. It really, I don't mean to get I'm not trying to be polemical, but the issue with the reason I said mythical 50s is when the evidence is so dependent on Acts. Now, many scholars will dismiss Acts and say Acts is not history. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
Right.
very uses
We're
very
getting
much,
there.
and
Right.
it very uses Josephus. And
But what about the letters themselves? There's a lot less mythology in the epistles. You don't have Paul doing miracles in the epistles, like.
Well, he does say
God.
he did the signs of an apostle, which makes me wonder what. Where's the amazing Randy?
There are hints in the epistles. There are hints of it, and this is why. This is why it makes more sense to me to move the text later in the first century. Now, to me, this doesn't. I don't think this, in my view, harms the historical Jesus.
Let me throw this out.
I think Jesus. I personally am convinced that there was a historical Jesus, regardless of when these letters were written.
Well, the letters of Paul are a critical piece of that evidence. But let me throw this out at both of you.
Sure.
In Marcion, in the Epistles, in Marcion's version of Paul's Galatians, James is not referred to as the brother of the Lord. On the other hand, in Josephus, we have this juicy reference. If we accept that juicy James reference in Josephus's Antiquities, we have a James killed around 62 who was the brother of the so-called or the aforementioned Christ. Now, could it be that Galatians, and I know you're not hip on interpolations, Jacob, but could it be that Galatians, the debate, you have evidence that the Galatians debate is actually happening in the 90s. Could it be that an interpolator of Galatians using Josephus is trying to fool us in time as to when the Galatians debate took place using Josephus and that reference?
No, again, I have to have manuscript evidence or I'm not going to believe it.
You're not going to believe in an interpolation. Well, to some extent we do, because Marcion's, the Epistles were...
No, come on, James. I think it's cutting down canonical Paul, so I'm not going to see that as evidence.
You think? But I just throw that out as a possibility.
No, because the problem is, to be consistent, then I have to believe everything that's not in Marcion is gone from the original. We can't have it both ways.
It have to be everything, Jacob. Could it be?
Could kind of weigh everything up. I mean, this starts.
No. What I mean is, I don't have a magic wand that can show me which piece is what. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, this is what I'm suggesting. If we do have a reason to believe that they would try and fool us about time, I mean, in Paul's little autobiography of miseries in 2 Corinthians, he says, I went through all these travails and shipwrecks and I fled from Aretas. And then we have the story in Acts. Acts seems to be picking up and misleading us about time, but the letter itself seems to be misleading us about time. Could it be that there's been some tampering with these letters to mislead us? Because
the problem is, if I start saying that something's tampered with to fit my view, it's not gonna. No, I don't like that.
I agree. We should avoid that.
No,
but you've made a very convincing case. I think you and Bob both. I think there's stuff in Romans. I think there's stuff. I mean, the wrath of God. What he writes.
Let's go back to Galatians, because the brother of the Lord reference is because of that. If you look at the Apocalypses of James, it talks about the James and Josephus as being the spiritual brother of Jesus and not his physical one. That's made clear in the first Apocalypse of James in the opening paragraph. That's all it is. That's what Paul is talking about in Galatians, is that it's and the thing is that James is continuing the James tradition. James, who wrote the letter of James, which Epiphanius talked about. Epiphanius saying the epistle of James written in the 90s fits the consensus dating. So did the author of James wait 40, 50 years to write it?
And I do agree that we have to accept the reality.
By his response to Galatians, I mean.
I think we have to accept the reality that people are writing in the name of Cephas or Peter. People are writing in the name of Paul. People
Well, the
writing...
author of James isn't claiming to be the original one. He said he's a follower of Jesus.
Right.
He didn't call
Well,
himself
the
his
Epistle
brother.
of James is probably not written by any pre-war James, but nonetheless, it's reflecting the
So
school.
here's what I think possibly both of you misunderstood when I was trying to say.
Okay.
I don't want to cherry pick, so I'm saying, okay, Galatians is evidence that Marcion's Galatians is evidence that Brother of the Lord isn't authentic. But the rest of the stuff was cut out of canonical Paul. Do you see the problem?
I do.
Well, Tertullian appears not to have it in his Galatians. It's an
I knew you would
argument
bring that
for
up.
time.
Yes.
I'm pretty predictable.
That was good, Bob. No, Dr. Price long ago convinced me that when you look at Paul's letters, what we're looking at is an internal mess of a variety of contradictions of various levels. And you both have convinced me that thinking that Paul writing to the Thessalonians that the wrath of God has come upon the Jews, or what Bob was pointing out about Romans, he's basically writing off the Jews. They've rejected us. Now, how can that be in a pre-war stage? And then, of course, we get to 1 Corinthians, weird that we don't want a material temple subject to flames. Well, that's an interesting prediction if the temple hasn't already been destroyed.
Yep.
But so we're talking about Romans, the correspondence with the Corinthians and Thessalonians, we basically said that at least significant parts of what are thought to be the most authentic Pauline letters are in fact post-war. And we have to belly up to the bar and accept that basic fact. It's not credible to me that even stuff that is regarded as the most authentic Pauline material is in fact written after the war and could not have been written by someone executed by Nero. And so this probably explains why you have mining of Josephus for a Saul in the 60s. I absolutely think you're on the right path there. And why Jerome would be confused. He's a young man in 70. It was really the letter writer Jerome contains the Nero martyrdom of Paul. But on the other hand, he also contains this tradition that Paul was a young man after the land was laid waste. The guy he's translating. And he even says he has a source for it. So what do we make of all that?
One guy I'd like to see dealt into the game here is Walter Schmidtals on 1 Corinthians. He said, first, he really convinced me, everything in 1 Corinthians, even the weirdest stuff like baptism for the dead and all this, all makes sense from what we know from Origen and others about 2nd century Gnosticism. But Schmidtals says, well, I guess this means that that's wrong. If Paul is writing it, it must have been this way already in the 1st century. Whereas I think he's ignoring what Trelch, I think, called the principle of historischer Zusammenhang. You have to have a historical setting that makes sense, and that's the 2nd century. So the supposed Pauline writing must have been written in the 2nd century.
Well, there's unmistakable Gnostic elements, aren't there?
Everywhere. Chapter 15, the resurrection body is a body of spirit. It has no flesh. What the hell? Well,
isn't it the peak irony that we have the story of Paul basically reattaching his head? When peak irony, Paul doesn't even believe in physical resurrection.
Yeah.
Gives no indication that he believes it, but Paul himself is going to get a physical resurrection.
And he has to tell the Corinthians, hey, why are you going to the prostitutes in the holy brothel? Well, who did that? Gnostic libertines. What do you think you're doing eating at an all-you-can-eat buffet in the temple of Apollo? But it's actually okay. Which Paul are we hearing in the different chapters? But one of them's a Gnostic. It's just food. Who cares? And I think despite himself, Schmidtals is showing that it's a 2nd century work. We know people were cursing Jesus in the name of Christ from Origin. We know what they did to baptize the dead, how they did it, and what they thought they were doing because of Origin. You can't just say, well, it was more or less the same thing. I mean, well, it could have been, but why not? I mean, the evidence seems to point in that direction. So even the great First Corinthians, to me, the most interesting of all of these epistles, is not originally Pauline, if the writer is supposed to be a first century writer, because it doesn't look like he is.
I think the reason that the main reason that Saul of Giscala wrote Galatians 1:19 was because he was trying to claim that the original Paul wrote Galatians. Because Clement, in the recognitions, he does call James the Lord's brother. He does do this. So that's why I think Galatians is lifting it from. It's also a very similar phrase to Josephus. The way Josephus wrote the James passage. You look at the Greek and you compare it to Galatians 1:19, it's identical. It's very similar.
You know, I'm going to have to go. I have circulation problems, and I can't sit for this long.
Okay.
Decrepit.
There are.
Let
me just take these two super chats really fast. They've been waiting here a while, and then we'll get off. ML, thank you for your super chat. Skinopoya sets the tent behind the stage. Set designer is better translation and bigger nod to Peter's Sunday school puppet show. Okay.
Set designer, not tent maker, but set designer.
And then we got
Ladies
one more.
and gentlemen, the amazing Jesus.
Kathy Brocado, thank you for your super sticker. And that's it. We're going to go ahead and close. Bob and Jim, as always, thank you both for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having us. Loads of fun.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
One more super chat, and I'm not taking any more after this. No more super chats.
Okay.
Solora Knight, thank you for your super chat. 2 Corinthians mentions King Aretas the 4th. Actually, it's the 5th. To a point. No, you're right. It's the 4th. What am I saying? To a date 340. I must be getting tired. 40 CE plus catastrophic Jewish war of 6670, not mentioned by Paul. Okay, so let me address this. King Aretas the 4th of Nabatea supposedly was chasing Paul. Hold on a minute. Yeah. So King Aretas the 4th was chasing Paul, but according to 2 Corinthians, Paul fled from Damascus. Well, King Aretas the 4th never controlled Damascus. That's just because King Aretas III controlled it a century prior. But if you look at the Saul mentioned by Josephus in the 60s, he's fleeing from Jerusalem, from the Herodian palace. And then Damascus gets mentioned right after that. He offers 2 Corinthians is misremembering the territory Aretas controlled, and then got the two mixed up. And again, the canonical Paul is all about mixing up identities anyway. All right,
makes a lot of sense.
No more super chats. James Harrow, just a quick question. That's century. I have no idea what you mean, but thank you for your super chat. All right, Juan. I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye. Hello, viewers. Thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.